On the morning of September 16, 1944, Private First Class Eugene Sledge crouched outside a cave entrance on Peleliu, watching smoke curl from the blackened coral opening. The 70-pound flamethrower strapped to his back felt heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Inside that cave, Japanese soldiers waited in the darkness, their rifles trained on the entrance, knowing what was coming. Sledge had been told the caves were impenetrable. The Japanese had spent months transforming Peleliu's natural limestone caverns into fortresses. They had reinforced entrances with concrete and steel. They had carved firing ports at angles that made direct fire impossible. They had connected hundreds of caves with tunnels, creating an underground network that could shelter entire companies. They had designed positions that could withstand naval bombardment, aerial bombing, and artillery barrages. The Japanese commanders believed their cave system would bleed the Americans white. They had studied previous island battles. They had learned from their defeats at Guadalcanal and Tarawa. This time, they would not charge into American machine guns. This time, they would wait in their caves, invisible and protected, and force the Marines to come to them, one cave at a time, one death at a time. What the Japanese did not anticipate was that the Americans would bring fire. By the time Peleliu was secured on November 27, 1944, after 73 days of combat, Marine flamethrower teams had neutralized hundreds of fortified positions that artillery could not touch and tanks could not reach. They had developed tactics that would become doctrine. They had proven that the weapon Japanese soldiers feared most was not the rifle or the grenade, but the man with napalm on his back. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The problem of cave warfare had emerged gradually as American forces pushed across the Pacific. In the early campaigns, on Guadalcanal and in the Solomon Islands, Japanese defensive positions were relatively simple. Bunkers made of logs and earth, trenches dug into hillsides, fighting holes covered with palm fronds. These could be destroyed with conventional weapons. Artillery could collapse them, tanks could overrun them, infantry could assault them with rifles and grenades. But as the war progressed, Japanese defensive doctrine evolved. By 1943, Imperial Army engineers had studied the effectiveness of underground fortifications. They had observed how caves protected troops from bombardment. They had calculated that one soldier, in a cave with adequate supplies, could inflict casualties, equivalent to 10 soldiers fighting in the open. The Japanese began fortifying islands months, sometimes years, before American forces arrived. On Peleliu, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa commanded a garrison of approximately 10,700 men. He had arrived in April 1944 with explicit orders. Do not die gloriously in banzai charges. Do not waste lives defending beaches. Instead, transform the island into a fortress that would consume American lives until the cost became unbearable. Nakagawa had excellent raw material to work with. Peleliu's central region, the Umabrogel Mountains, was a maze of coral ridges rising up to 300 feet above sea level. Millions of years of erosion had carved the limestone into a nightmare landscape of sharp pinnacles, sinkholes, and natural caves. The coral itself was solid enough to stop artillery shells, but soft enough to excavate with hand tools. Japanese engineers expanded natural caves and carved new ones. They blasted tunnels connecting cave systems across entire ridges. They installed steel doors that could be opened to fire and then slammed shut before return. Fire arrived. They positioned artillery pieces deep inside cave complexes where only the muzzle showed when firing. They built 5-story underground barracks with ventilation shafts, ammunition storage, and field hospitals. Some caves were small, holding only 3 or 4 men with a machine gun. Others were massive complexes that sheltered 200 soldiers. All were designed with one principle in mind: make the Americans pay in blood for every yard of ground. The American plan for Peleliu reflected confidence born from previous victories. Major General William Rupertus, commanding the 1st Marine Division, predicted the island would be secured in 4 days. He had good reason for optimism. His division was veteran, battle-tested, and well-equipped. They had fought on Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester. They knew jungle warfare. The pre-invasion bombardment seemed overwhelming. For 3 days, from September 12th to September 14th, 1944, Navy battleships, cruisers pounded Peleliu with thousands of shells. Naval aviators dropped hundreds of bombs. The island appeared to be smoking rubble. Intelligence officers reported that nothing could have survived the bombardment. They were catastrophically wrong. On the morning of September 15th, 1944, Marines of the 1st, 5th, and 7th Regiments hit the beaches in amphibious tractors. Initial resistance was light. The Japanese were not defending the beaches. They were waiting inland, in their caves, watching the Marines advance into killing zones carefully prepared and registered for artillery fire. When the Marines pushed inland toward the Brogol, they encountered a new kind of warfare. Machine gun fire erupted from cave entrances invisible until the moment they opened fire. Mortar rounds fell with uncanny accuracy, called in by spotters hidden in elevated cave positions. Artillery shells exploded among advancing troops, fired from guns the Marines could not see and could not target. Marines tried conventional tactics. Artillery forward observers called in fire missions, directing hundreds of shells onto suspected cave positions. The shells exploded against solid coral, sending up clouds of dust and rock fragments. But when the barrage lifted, the caves remained operational. The Japanese simply waited out the bombardment deep underground, then emerged to resume firing. Tanks were brought forward. Sherman tanks, their 75mm guns capable of destroying concrete bunkers, fired armor-piercing rounds directly into cave entrances. The shells ricocheted off the coral, or exploded harmlessly inside the entrance without penetrating deep enough to reach the defenders. The Japanese had designed their caves with sharp turns just inside the entrance. No straight shot could reach the interior positions. Navy dive bombers attacked with 1,000-pound bombs. The explosions were spectacular, sending up columns of coral dust and debris. But bombs could not collapse the caves. The coral absorbed the blast. Minutes after an airstrike, Japanese soldiers would emerge from the smoke and resume their positions. The Marines were forced to resort to close assault. Rifle squads would advance under covering fire, reach a cave entrance, and attempt to clear it with grenades and small arms fire. This was extraordinarily dangerous. The approaches to most caves were swept by fire from supporting positions. Even reaching a cave entrance often cost casualties. And grenades thrown into a cave could be thrown back out by defenders who knew the cave layout and could take cover around corners. Men died trying to clear caves with tactics designed for surface bunkers. On September 16th, 2nd Lieutenant Carlton Roux led his platoon against a cave complex on the western edge of the Brogol. His men advanced in short rushes, covering each other, following doctrine. They reached the first cave entrance. Roux threw 2 grenades inside. Both exploded. His men rushed the entrance. Japanese machine gun fire cut them down. The grenades had detonated in the entrance chamber, but the machine gun position was 20 feet deeper, around a corner, untouched. Roux and 4 of his men died within seconds. The survivors pulled back. The cave remained in Japanese hands. This pattern repeated across Peleliu. Caves that appeared to be neutralized would suddenly erupt with fresh fire as Japanese troops moved through connecting tunnels to reoccupy positions. Defending forces could be killed in one cave, only to have that same cave reoccupied within hours by troops who entered from a different tunnel. By September 17th, after 3 days of combat, the 1st Marine Division had suffered over 1,200 casualties, progress measured in yards. And the vast majority of Peleliu's estimated 500 fortified caves remained operational. Marine commanders recognized they needed a new weapon and new tactics. They needed something that could reach deep into caves, something the Japanese could not evade by taking cover around corners, something that would force defenders to flee or die. They needed fire. The M1A1 portable flamethrower had been issued to Marine units in early 1943, but its use had been limited. The early models were unreliable. The fuel mixture, plain gasoline with diesel, burned too quickly, and had insufficient range. Operators had to approach within 10 to 15 yards of their target, exposing themselves to intense fire. By mid-1944, improvements had transformed the weapon. The Chemical Warfare Service had developed napalm, an aluminum soap compound mixed with gasoline that created a thickened fuel. This napalm burned much hotter, at temperatures exceeding 2,190 degrees Fahrenheit. It stuck to surfaces instead of splashing off. It burned longer, up to 10 seconds from a 5-gallon tank. Most importantly, its range extended to nearly 40 yards. The M2 flamethrower, standardized in 1944, consisted of 2 cylinders carried as a backpack. One cylinder held compressed nitrogen propellant. The other held napalm. Total weight when full was 70 pounds. The operator carried a wand, essentially a heavy-duty nozzle with an ignition system, connected to the cylinders by reinforced hoses. When the operator squeezed the trigger, compressed nitrogen forced napalm through the nozzle at high pressure. An electrical spark or magnesium igniter at the nozzle tip ignited the stream, creating a jet of liquid fire that could be directed with precision. The jet was narrow, only a few inches wide, allowing operators to spray fire through small openings. Against cave positions, the flamethrower had unique advantages. The napalm stream could turn corners, following the interior geometry of a cave as burning fuel splashed off walls and ceilings. The fire consumed oxygen, creating suffocating conditions deep, inside cave complexes where ventilation was limited. The intense heat and choking smoke forced defenders to either flee or die. And napalm stuck to everything, creating pools of fire that continued burning for minutes, making it impossible for defenders to reoccupy cleared positions immediately. But operating a flamethrower in combat required extraordinary courage. The weapon was heavy and awkward, slowing the operator's movement. The bright orange jet of flame was visible for hundreds of yards, attracting every Japanese rifleman and machine gunner in range. The cylinders strapped to the operator's back contained compressed gas and highly flammable fuel. A bullet strike could rupture the tanks, though contrary to Hollywood depictions, they did not explode. Instead, ruptured tanks released napalm that could ignite, turning the operator into a human torch. The average life expectancy of a flamethrower operator in combat was measured in minutes, not hours. Japanese snipers, specifically, targeted them. Infantry assault doctrine recognized that flamethrower operators needed constant protection. Each flamethrower was supported by 4 to 6 riflemen, whose sole mission was suppressing enemy fire long enough for the operator to reach effective range and engage the target. On Peleliu, Marine commanders began organizing specialized assault teams built around flamethrowers. These teams combined different capabilities into a coordinated system. Browning automatic rifles provided sustained suppressive fire at longer ranges. Riflemen with M1 Garand rifles protected the flanks and rear. Demolition men carried satchel charges and pole charges, and at the center of each team, a flamethrower operator. The tactic that emerged became known as corkscrew and blowtorch. The corkscrew was high explosives, demolitions that sealed or destroyed cave entrances after they were cleared. The blowtorch was the flamethrower, burning out defenders and making caves untenable. The procedure was methodical and dangerous. First, supporting elements would identify a target cave and establish positions with clear fields of fire covering the approaches. BAR gunners would pour automatic fire into the cave entrance and any visible gun ports, forcing defenders to take cover. Under this suppressive fire, the assault team would advance. The flamethrower operator, moving in short rushes from cover to cover, would work his way to within 30 to 40 yards of the cave entrance. At that range, he would open fire, directing the napalm stream into the opening. The burning fuel would splash into the entrance chamber, then flow deeper into the cave, following the interior passages. Defenders had 3 options. They could stay and burn. They could try to escape the flames by moving deeper into connected tunnels. Or they could flee the entrance. Japanese soldiers emerging from flamed caves presented an appalling sight. Their uniforms were often burning. Some came out with weapons, attempting desperate final attacks. Others emerged unarmed, hands raised, burned and gasping for air. Marines posted near cave entrances would cut down those who attacked and capture those who surrendered, though surrender was rare. Once a cave was cleared by flame, demolition men would move forward with satchel charges, explosives packed in canvas bags, sometimes 30 to 50 pounds of TNT per charge. They would place these charges inside the cave entrance or in the main chamber, light the fuse, and withdraw. The explosion would collapse the entrance or destroy the interior, preventing reoccupation. Private First Class Arthur Jackson demonstrated the effectiveness of flamethrower tactics on September 19, 1944, during the assault on Peleliu's central ridges. His company was pinned down by fire from a cave complex that had already cost them 8 casualties. Artillery had failed to suppress the position. A tank attempting to provide direct fire support had been damaged by a Japanese anti-tank weapon fired from a concealed position. Jackson volunteered to take his flamethrower forward. With 4 Marines providing covering fire, he advanced across exposed ground toward the cave. Japanese rifle fire kicked up coral dust around him. A machine gun burst passed close enough that he felt the pressure wave. He kept moving. At 30 yards, Jackson stopped, braced himself, and directed his flamethrower at the cave entrance. The jet of burning napalm arced through the air and splashed into the opening. He held the trigger down, sweeping the nozzle back and forth, pumping fire deep into the cave. His tank ran dry after 8 seconds. 3 Japanese soldiers burst from the cave, their uniforms smoking, rifles abandoned. Marine riflemen shot all 3 before they covered 10 yards. Jackson's team moved up, confirmed the cave was clear, and placed demolition charges. The explosion sealed the entrance permanently. For that action and subsequent operations over the crime, next 3 days, during which he personally cleared 12 fortified caves and eliminated 50 Japanese defenders, Jackson was awarded the Medal of Honor. His citation noted his exceptional initiative and utter disregard of personal safety in the face of devastating enemy fire. Jackson's actions were exceptional, but not unique. Across Peleliu, Marine flamethrower teams were developing and refining tactics through trial and error. Some lessons were written in blood. Operators learned not to fire from prone positions. The napalm stream could splash back off cave walls, showering the operator with burning fuel. They learned to fire from a slight crouch, allowing gravity to carry the napalm forward and down into cave entrances. They learned to give short bursts rather than continuous streams, conserving fuel and avoiding backspray. Teams learned to coordinate their movements. The flamethrower operator became the most protected man in the unit. Riflemen would not advance past him. They would maintain constant suppressive fire during his approach. Some teams even developed hand signals, allowing silent coordination in the chaos of combat. Marines learned to identify different types of caves. Small caves with single entrances could be cleared and sealed quickly. Large cave complexes with multiple entrances required systematic approaches, clearing one section at a time while blocking other exits. Connected caves presented the greatest challenge, requiring teams to work together, clearing multiple entrances simultaneously to prevent defenders from simply shifting positions through connecting tunnels. The Japanese attempted to counter flamethrower tactics. They designed some cave entrances with angled steel doors that could be quickly closed, blocking the napalm stream. This worked occasionally, but steel heated by napalm conducted that heat throughout the door and into the cave interior, and the doors had to be operated manually, exposing the operator to small arms fire. Some Japanese positions were equipped with water barrels, allowing defenders to douse flames. This provided temporary relief but consumed precious water supplies and did nothing about the smoke and fumes that filled enclosed spaces. Japanese snipers were ordered to target flamethrower operators as priority targets. This increased operator casualties significantly. Marine commanders responded by increasing the size of support teams and ensuring that approach routes provided maximum cover. By the end of September 1944, after 2 weeks of fighting on Peleliu, the Marines had refined their cave-clearing techniques into a brutally effective system. Each regiment was assigned 81 flamethrowers, though casualties and equipment losses meant that actual numbers in the field were often lower. Flamethrower operators became specialists, their knowledge of tactics and cave warfare making them invaluable. The psychological impact of flamethrowers on both sides was profound. For Japanese defenders, the weapon was uniquely terrifying. Artillery could be endured by taking cover, small arms fire could be returned, but fire offered no tactical response. It consumed everything. It penetrated every space, and it brought an agonizing death. Captured Japanese documents from Peleliu revealed that Imperial Army commanders specifically warned their troops about American flamethrower tactics. One document, translated by Marine intelligence, instructed cave defenders to concentrate fire on flamethrower operators at all costs, even at the expense of engaging other targets. The document noted that once napalm entered a cave complex, that position should be considered lost, and survivors should immediately withdraw through connecting tunnels if possible. For Marine operators, the psychological burden was different but equally heavy. Eugene Sledge, who survived Peleliu and later wrote extensively about his experiences, described flamethrower work as the most morally complex aspect of combat he witnessed. The weapon was necessary. It saved Marine lives by clearing positions that could not be neutralized by other means. But its effects were horrific. Sledge wrote about watching a Japanese soldier emerge from a cave after being flamed, his body burning, stumbling blindly before collapsing. He wrote about the smell, a combination of burning napalm, smouldering flesh, and sulfur that clung to everything and could not be washed away. He wrote about the sounds, the screams that came from deep inside caves when napalm found its targets. These memories haunted him for decades after the war ended. Yet Sledge also recognized the tactical reality. Every cave cleared by flamethrower meant Japanese soldiers who could no longer kill Marines. Every fortified position neutralized meant ground gained and lives saved. The moral calculus of war reduced itself to brutal mathematics. The flamethrower was terrible, but it worked. By early October 1944, the fighting on Peleliu had settled into a grim pattern. The 1st Marine Division, badly depleted, had been reinforced by elements of the Army's 81st Infantry Division. Together, they compressed the Japanese defenders into an ever-shrinking perimeter in the Umurbrogel Mountains, an area that would become known as Bloody Nose Ridge. The ridge system was approximately 400 yards wide and 800 yards long, a coral fortress honeycombed with hundreds of interconnected caves. Colonel Nakagawa had withdrawn his remaining forces here, establishing his command post in a cave complex deep within the ridge. His remaining troops, perhaps 4,000 men, occupied positions throughout the system. American commanders faced a decision. They could bypass the ridge, leaving Japanese forces isolated and contained while moving on to other objectives. Or they could dig them out, cave by cave. The decision was made to continue the assault. Peleliu's airfield had to be made secure, and as long as Japanese artillery observers remained alive in the ridge caves, they could call down fire on the airfield and American positions. The assault on Bloody Nose Ridge from October 3rd through October 15th became a masterclass in cave warfare and flamethrower tactics. It also became a nightmare that pushed men to their physical and psychological limits. The terrain was almost impossible. The coral ridges were too steep for tanks. Artillery had limited effectiveness against reinforced cave positions. Supplies had to be carried forward by hand. Wounded men had to be evacuated by stretcher, requiring 4 to 6 men to navigate the razor-sharp coral while under fire. Every yard gained cost blood. Marine and Army units developed specialized assault teams that operated with brutal efficiency. A typical team consisted of 12 to 15 men. At the front, scouts would identify cave positions and potential approach routes. Behind them, a BAR team of 2 men would establish a support position with clear fields of fire. 4 riflemen would provide security and suppressive fire. A flamethrower operator and his assistant, who carried extra fuel cylinders, formed the assault element. Demolition men with satchel charges followed. At the rear, a corpsman provided medical support. These teams would work methodically through a cave complex, clearing one position at a time. The process was exhausting. Coral dust mixed with sweat, coating men in a grey paste. The heat was oppressive, regularly exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Water supplies were limited. Every man carried at least 2 canteens, but in the intense heat and physical exertion, those canteens would be drained within hours. Flamethrower operators faced additional challenges. The 70-pound weight of their weapon, combined with the heat and terrain, meant they could operate for only short periods before needing relief. Units began rotating operators frequently, with each man taking turns carrying the weapon. This distributed the burden, but also meant that more men needed training in flamethrower tactics. Staff Sergeant Thomas Savage became one of the most effective flamethrower operators on Bloody Nose Ridge. A former welder from Detroit, Michigan, Savage had enlisted in 1942 at age 24. His mechanical aptitude made him a natural choice for flamethrower training. By October 1944, he had been operating the weapon in combat for over 2 weeks. On October 7th, Savage's company was tasked with clearing a cave complex designated as Objective Baker 14, a series of interconnected caves on the western slope of a ridge called Hill 100. Intelligence estimated between 40 and 60 Japanese soldiers occupied the complex. Previous assaults had been repulsed with heavy casualties. Savage's team began their approach at dawn. They moved slowly, using every depression in the coral for cover. Japanese machine gun fire from positions above Baker 14 raked the slope. 2 men were wounded in the initial advance. The team took cover and called for supporting fire. Navy dive bombers attacked the ridge top, dropping bombs that exploded in towers of coral dust. The bombing suppressed the Japanese machine guns temporarily, giving Savage's team time to advance. They reached a position 40 yards from the main cave entrance. Savage studied the target. The entrance was approximately 6 feet wide and 4 feet high, carved into a vertical coral face. He could see sandbags inside the entrance, forming a defensive position. A machine gun barrel protruded from a firing port. The cave showed signs of previous attacks. Scorch marks from earlier flamethrower attempts blackened the coral around the entrance. Shell craters pockmarked the approach. The BAR gunner opened fire, pouring rounds into the cave entrance. Savage moved forward in a crouch, his flamethrower ready. At 35 yards, he stopped, braced his legs, and aimed. He squeezed the trigger. The jet of napalm arced through the air, a stream of orange flame trailing black smoke. It splashed into the cave entrance, spreading across the sandbags and flowing deeper into the cave. Savage held the trigger down, sweeping the nozzle slightly to spread the fire. His tank emptied after 7 seconds. The result was immediate and terrible. Flames billowed from the cave entrance. Smoke, thick and black, poured out. From deep inside the cave came screams, muffled but unmistakable. Savage's assistant rushed forward with a fresh fuel cylinder. They swapped tanks in less than 30 seconds, a procedure they had practiced hundreds of times. Before Savage could fire again, Japanese soldiers began emerging from the cave. The first man was burning, his uniform aflame, his rifle abandoned. He stumbled forward 3 steps and collapsed. 2 more emerged, not burning but coughing, gasping for air. Marine riflemen cut them down. Then the cave exploded. The blast was massive, a gout of flame and debris that erupted from the entrance and 2 other openings higher on the ridge face. The pressure wave knocked Savage backward. Chunks of coral and steel rained down across the slope. The team took cover, shielding themselves from falling debris. When the smoke cleared, all 3 cave openings were collapsed. The explosion had come from inside, likely ammunition stores detonated by the fire. The entire complex was destroyed. Savage's team counted 11 Japanese bodies around the entrances. Intelligence later estimated another 30 died inside when the ammunition exploded. Savage's action at Baker 14 was one of dozens of similar engagements across Bloody Nose Ridge. By mid-October, assault teams had cleared over 200 fortified caves in less than 2 weeks. The tactics had been refined to brutal simplicity. Locate the cave, suppress defensive fire, flame the interior, demolish the entrance, Move to the next target. The efficiency came at a cost. Flamethrower operator casualties remained high. On October 10th, Private First Class David Russell was killed by a sniper while advancing on a cave position. The bullet struck his fuel tank, rupturing it. The escaping napalm was ignited by his weapon's pilot light. Russell died within seconds. His team could not reach him to render aid because the burning napalm made approach impossible. On October 12th, Corporal James Hebert's flamethrower malfunctioned during an assault. The ignition system failed, spraying unignited napalm instead of flame. Japanese defenders, seeing an opportunity, rushed the cave entrance and killed Hebert with rifle fire before his support team could intervene. The incident led to immediate orders that all flamethrowers be inspected and tested before every operation. Despite the casualties, the cave-clearing operations continued relentlessly. American commanders had committed to eliminating Japanese resistance on Peleliu, and the flamethrower teams were the primary tool for achieving that objective. By October 15th, organized Japanese resistance on Bloody Nose Ridge had been largely eliminated. Small pockets remained, isolated and unsupplied, but the integrated defensive system had been broken. The final phase of operations on Peleliu involved hunting down the last Japanese holdouts. These were often individual soldiers or small groups occupying remote caves, refusing surrender, surviving on rainwater, and whatever supplies they had cached. Some of these positions held out until late November. Colonel Nakagawa, commanding from his cave headquarters, realized by late October that his position was hopeless. His ammunition was nearly exhausted. His food supplies were gone. His communication with higher headquarters had been cut off. Most importantly, his cave fortress, the impregnable defensive system that was supposed to bleed the Americans white, had been systematically destroyed by flamethrower teams. On November 24, 1944, with fewer than 60 soldiers remaining alive under his command, Nakagawa burned his regimental colors and committed ritual suicide. His final radio message to Imperial headquarters stated that he had failed in his mission, but that his men had fought with honor and inflicted maximum casualties on the enemy. He was correct about the casualties. The Battle of Peleliu cost the 1st Marine Division over 6,500 casualties, including 1,542 killed in action. The Army's 81st Infantry Division suffered an additional 1,300 casualties. Total American casualties exceeded 8,000, making Peleliu one of the costliest battles in the Pacific War relative to the size of the forces engaged. Japanese casualties were even more severe. Of the approximately 10,700 defenders, only 202 were captured alive. The rest died fighting or committed suicide. The exchange ratio that Japanese planners had hoped to achieve, bleeding the Americans through protracted defense, had been obtained. But the strategic value of that exchange remained debatable. What was not debatable was the effectiveness of flamethrower tactics against fortified cave positions. After Peleliu, the flamethrower became standard equipment in Marine and Army infantry units operating in the Pacific. Doctrine evolved to emphasize combined arms assault teams built around the weapon. Training programs expanded to produce more operators. The lessons learned on Peleliu would be applied in subsequent campaigns. On Iwo Jima in February 1945, Marine flamethrower teams cleared over 800 cave positions during a month-long battle. On Okinawa from April through June 1945, both Marine and Army units used flamethrower tactics to reduce Japanese defensive positions in the island's southern caves and ridges. The weapon also evolved. Tank-mounted flamethrowers, developed late in the war, provided armored protection for operators and carried larger fuel supplies. The M4A2 Sherman tank, equipped with a flame projector in place of its main gun, could direct fire into caves from protected positions. These flame tanks proved highly effective, combining the mobility and armor of a tank with the cave-clearing capability of portable flamethrowers. Portable flamethrowers themselves improved. The M22 model, introduced in late 1944, featured better fuel mixtures and improved ignition systems. Range increased to nearly 50 yards. Fuel capacity increased to allow longer burns. Reliability improved significantly, reducing malfunctions that left operators vulnerable. The tactical doctrine continued to evolve. By 1945, combined arms assault teams had become highly sophisticated. Forward observers coordinated naval gunfire and artillery to suppress cave complexes before assault teams moved forward. Combat engineers used explosives to create approach routes through difficult terrain. Tanks provided direct fire support and mobile cover. And at the center of every assault on fortified positions, flamethrower teams cleared the caves that conventional weapons could not neutralize. The veterans who operated flamethrowers in combat rarely spoke about their experiences after the war. The weapons' effects were simply too horrific, the memories too painful. Eugene Sledge's memoir, published in 1981, remains one of the few detailed first-hand accounts of flamethrower operations from an operator's perspective. Sledge wrote with brutal honesty about the moral weight of the weapon. He described it as necessary but terrible, effective but soul-destroying. He noted that many flamethrower operators developed what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, haunted by memories of what they had done and what they had witnessed. The flamethrower's legacy in military history is complex. It was undeniably effective against fortified positions, particularly caves that resisted conventional weapons. It saved countless American lives by providing a means to clear positions that would otherwise have required costly frontal assaults. The tactical innovations developed around the weapon influenced doctrine for decades, but it remained controversial, even among those who used it. The weapon's effects were considered inhumane by many, even in the context of total war. International conventions after World War II attempted to restrict the use of incendiary weapons, though enforcement remained inconsistent. On Peleliu, in the caves of Bloody Nose Ridge, the flamethrower proved that even the most sophisticated defensive positions could be defeated. The Japanese cave fortress that was supposed to be impregnable fell to fire, carried forward by Marines who accepted extraordinary risks to clear positions one by one. The 73-day battle transformed cave warfare doctrine and demonstrated that courage, combined with the right weapons and tactics, could overcome any defense. The cost of that demonstration, measured in lives and psychological trauma, would be debated for generations. But the tactical lesson was clear and would be remembered. When faced with fortified caves, the answer was fire. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.